Guys, we've got the brand new Losi Super Lasernut back on the bench, and today we're gonna give this thing an 8S torture test, but first, we've got some work we need to do to it. In the previous video, we spit out this dog bone pretty quickly in the 6S testing, which means we didn't really get to give it a fair chance on 6S. I wanna get this put back in and then run it back on 6S again. However, this thing is absolutely filthy, so we need to get it cleaned up first. Before we do that, we need to make this thing waterproof, and it's not waterproof because of this receiver box. Unfortunately, because of Traxxas patents, most receiver boxes aren't waterproof, and trying to make this box itself waterproof is probably not practical. So instead, we're gonna make the receiver itself waterproof. This is my FlySky receiver, but this method could work for just about any receiver. And to do this, all you need is a glove, some grease, and a zip tie. This method's gonna be a little bit more simple than the previous method I showed you, which included conformally coating the board. All you need to do here is cut the thumb off of a glove. Try to do a better job than I just did. Then you just take your receiver, stuff it in the glove. Make sure you don't rip it. The thicker the glove, the better. Some receivers are going to be easier than others. This one's pretty challenging. And once you get the receiver in the glove, get yourself a nice finger full of grease and put it right toward the edge of where the glove meets the wires. This is not fully necessary, but it does really help waterproof things. And you're just going to take your zip tie, wrap it around where the wires go through, try to get it right where that grease is on the glove, and tighten it down nice and tight. And that's pretty much it. You can see some of the grease squeezed out. This is now encased in the glove finger, and this is a fairly water-resistant seal. This obviously isn't 100% waterproof. However, as long as you are careful when you reinstall it and don't let this glove get ripped, this should protect your receiver pretty well. And it's a lot simpler than taking it apart and conformally coating it. If your gloves are thin, you could always use 2 or 3 gloves for extra reinforcement, and nitrile or latex gloves work just fine. And coupling that with the already water-resistant ESC, motor, and servo, we can go ahead and wash this truck. And to clean this, we're just gonna wash it off with a hose. I usually wash the inside and the outside, making sure to get everything thoroughly clean, being kind of careful around the electronics because even though they are technically waterproof, they're usually not 100% waterproof, and also keeping in mind that I'm doing this at my own risk because even though they call this stuff waterproof, water can still damage things. While I finish rinsing this off, now would be a great time to let me know you're enjoying this video by hitting that subscribe button. Once I'm done with that, I blow the whole thing off with compressed air to try and get as much water out of everything as possible. And then most importantly, I put it in front of a fan to finish drying. This helps to ensure that next time you come to the car, you're not gonna have a bunch of rusted screws from water getting stuck in them and sitting there for 2 days. Of course, I do want to reiterate that if you hose down your truck, you do so at your own risk. Be aware of the limitations and make sure your truck can handle it before you do it. Now that the truck is cleaner, the first thing we need to do is reinstall this dog bone that got spit out in the last bashing session. Now, speaking of that dog bone, there are a lot of parts on this truck that are carryovers from the previous buggy and truggy. However, there are a lot of unique parts to this truck. For instance, this dog bone is a new part number, as well as the universals in the front. However, the front and rear hubs and knuckles are carryover from the buggy and truggy. These upper links are carryover from the truggy. These stub axles, as well as the output cups, appear to be unique. And while these shocks appear to be unique, they seem to be a combination of the bodies and shock shafts from the truggy and buggy. Sway bars are from the truggy. The arms are from the truggy, and most of the bits that attach the arms to the chassis are directly from the buggy and truggy, which is one of the places that I'm really concerned about. I actually broke the upper bulkhead on the buggy, doing just some general hard bashing. And unfortunately, as you see here, not only is the upper bulkhead not available right now, but there are a lot of truggy and buggy parts that are unavailable. And one of the biggest complaints I've seen about these Losi cars has been availability of parts. People say sometimes they just can't get parts, and that rear upper bulkhead is definitely a good example. Wrapping up what's shared and unique, obviously everything associated with the body is going to be unique. The chassis itself is going to be unique, along with the chassis brace and the battery tray, although the battery tray does look very similar to the buggy and truggy. The motor and ESC are unique to this platform, but are just the 6S motor and ESC from the Arrma vehicles. This servo is unique to this platform, however, it is just the old servo from the 8S Arrma trucks. And unfortunately, this servo might be a big limitation for you because the newer servos on the Arrma trucks actually are standard 1/5 scale servos. So you really only have a couple of options for servos with this until someone comes up with a different mount. Now, speaking of servos, the other major issue I was having on that first bashing session was this link was coming off constantly. I'm just gonna add a washer to this to stop this ball from popping off. Actually, I found something even better. I'm gonna use one of these servo mount screws from the Traxxas Max. This should 100% guarantee this doesn't pop off, and Losi really should have done something like this from the factory. Double shear is very common these days, and it would not have cost them much to fix this. I suspect I'm not gonna be the only person having this problem. Wrapping up what is unique and what is carried over, the shock towers are unique. The shock mounts are carried over. The differentials are carried over from the XTE. They are better than the XT, which uses a lower quality ring and pinion. Center drive shafts are unique. Center differential is the same. However, the spur gear is an optional lightened spur gear that isn't on any of the vehicles as far as I could tell. Rear drive shaft is unique. And then most of the other little bits and pieces are basically the same as they are on the buggy and on the truggy. We are going to be torture testing this truck on 8S, but for now, let's put some 6S batteries in it and see if we can redeem ourselves with regular bashing. Before we go bash this thing, there's one more thing I want to do. I noticed there's a ton of slop in these dog bones, and that's probably what caused the dog bone to get spit out. There's usually a pretty simple solution to this that, again, should have probably been implemented by Losi. So let's pull this apart, implement that solution, and try and give this truck a real fighting chance of being successful on 6S. And this mod is extremely simple. All I did is grab some O-rings from my O-ring assortment box. If you don't have an O-ring assortment box, get one on Amazon. They're really, really handy. I'm just going to drop an appropriately sized one of those inside the cup on either end and then put the shaft back in. Traxxas actually had this exact same problem on their sledge. They said that they found they were supposed to have O-rings in them and just forgot. Whether or not that's true or they were just saving face, no one will ever know. Putting those O-rings in did fix the problem, and now they come standard with those O-rings. So hopefully we'll have the same result here. So to compare, without the O-rings we have this much play, and now with the O-rings we have this much play. And of course, those O-rings are compliant, so they're not going to stop the suspension travel from working properly, but they will keep these centered and hopefully stop them from getting spit out. Let me do the other side, I'll get the wheels on this thing, and I'll see you outside. Okay guys, before we talk about how that went, let's talk about how Losi markets this car. In the description on Horizon's website, it says that other standout features include a rugged all-metal four-wheel drive driveline built to handle extreme off-road terrain. Down further in the description, they mention using it on big open lots, dirt roads, and any place you take a four-wheeler or UTV. Taking a look at the promo video on this, you can see it bouncing off of rocks, doing small jumps, and doing general light to moderate bashing. Now, in my opinion, that is pretty much exactly what I've been doing with this thing so far. Unfortunately, that bashing has really taken its toll on this thing. Let's take a closer look. First of all, I do want to say that it appears as though my O-rings did fix the problem with it spitting out the axle shafts. Installing the screw with a larger head seems to have fixed the problem with this link popping off. And overall, the servo, motor, and ESC seemed up to the task of what we were doing. However, unfortunately, the chassis itself does not. First of all, this chassis is bent. It's not by a terrible amount, but I checked it with a straight edge and it's definitely not flat anymore. And it's pushed down here in the front and in the back. But that's not the major problem. The major problem is back here in the back where you can see that this hinge pin is bent and this arm is just about to rip out of it. The hinge pin on the other side also appears to be slightly bent. Though at least for now, the front ones look okay. The worrying part about this for me is I have no idea how this happened. I've taken a few tumbles with this thing, but I don't remember ever landing directly on this arm or wheel, and this appears to have happened just from standard bashing and tumbling around. It's kind of hard to see, but on top of that, the rear tower is also bent. However, so far the front tower looks just fine. And unfortunately, that's where I think we're gonna leave off with the testing, and all that's left now is my opinion on this truck. Before I share that opinion, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, this opinion is just my opinion based on my experience. If there's one thing I've learned in this hobby is that everybody's experience is different and your experience might be different. The other thing is I want to explain why we're not going to be putting 8S in this. I do like to push vehicles to their limit, but I feel like we've already pretty much reached the limit of this vehicle, and I don't see any point in taking it off a jump when I know it's going to break. So what do I think about this truck? First of all, it's absolutely gorgeous. This is a beautiful design. It's big on perfectly flat, smooth ground. It handles pretty well. It doesn't like to traction roll. It does seem to have a decent amount of power. Unfortunately, since I only got a pack or so of total bashing through it, I didn't really get a chance to test the temperatures on the motor. I expect them to be pretty warm though, so you're gonna probably want to put fans on it no matter what you're doing. But the big problem with this truck is it just can't bash. And I don't mean it can't jump 6 feet in the air. I don't mean it can't smash into a concrete wall. What I mean is if you're mildly bashing this thing and it takes a tumble or you land a couple foot high jump wrong, there's a good chance something's going to break. Keep in mind, there's less than a pack total through this truck right now. And so far I've lost a dog bone that I was able to fix. The steering link came off multiple times, which again, I was able to fix. We've bent the rear shock tower. We've just about lost one of the rear arms. The chassis is bent, and there may be some other things I haven't noticed yet. This is a pretty rare recommendation for me, but unless you want this thing for a shelf queen or are okay with the fact that it's almost certainly going to break most of the times you take it out, I can't recommend buying one of these things. It's a beautiful car, but it's not up to even the lowest standards of modern bashing. And I feel like most people who take this thing out probably aren't gonna have a good time with it in the long run, especially don't forget this thing's $800. It's a big truck, but it's $800. Let's very briefly talk about why this is the case. This is a 1/8 scale buggy truggy platform that has been adapted to this truck. Most of the places where things attach are off of that same buggy truggy platform, and it's the budget version of that platform. This thing basically weighs twice as much as the heaviest version of that 8 scale platform. It's basically the same length as an XRT, and you just can't get around the physics. When this thing takes a tumble, there's a ton of weight behind that crash, and this system just was never designed to take those kinds of impacts. So let me know what you think down in the comments about this. Am I being too harsh on this truck? Do you want to get one anyway? I'd love to hear your opinion on it. While you're down there, make sure you get subscribed, then check out one of these videos.